Welcome. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Wherever you're watching in the world, it's great to have you watching this panel debate about the role that Ford played in the recent COVID-19 crisis and some of the unexpected improvisation that is being engaged in. I'm joined today with Jim Hackett, the CEO of Ford, with Rory Gamble, the head of the United Auto Workers Union, and Pete Berg, who's a renowned filmmaker, award-winning filmmaker, who's been telling their story in recent months, and his documentary On the Line will be showing very soon. We live in an era of incredible improvisation and unexpected surprises for both good and bad. I mean, the very fact we're sitting here talking to you from remote screens over in Los Angeles, Manhattan myself, and the middle of the country, Michigan and Detroit, indicates the kind of improvisation that we're all having to get used to. And there's been a lot of very bad news coming out of this improvisation and these shocks in an era of COVID. But there's also been some good news as well. And what we're going to be talking about now is one aspect of that, which is the way that the auto sector and manufacturing industry in general, and what we're talking about now is Ford Motor Company in particular, have responded to the COVID-19 crisis and pivoted to produce PPE and other necessary equipment. It's a fascinating story. And I'd like to start with you, Jim Hackett. I hope you don't mind me calling you Jim.
Not at all.
Ford is best known, obviously, for making cars, and yet you have been very busy in the last 6 months doing all kinds of medical equipment. This came in as part of the Defense Production Act and the appeal from the White House. Tell us a bit about what actually happened in terms of how, why, when you had that appeal, how you felt about it, and how you managed to get the ball rolling within, I gather, just 5 days of first getting that call from the White House to jump into various forms of medical devices.
Well, the story actually starts, in history in the turn of the century, believe it or not, because Ford found itself in the face of other kinds of crises. There was a polio crisis, and Ford had to make these treatment systems to help people recover from polio. And then World War II, building bombers at a famous factory called Willow Run, where we produced a bomber once every 63 minutes. And so we produce an F-150 once every 62 seconds today. And so when this moment kind of fell upon us, for the listeners, it's important to know my brother here, Rory Gamble, who's head of the UAW, was holding meetings with all the heads of the automotive companies to try and understand whether these factories that we have, I mean, we're talking about in Southeast Michigan, Ford alone having close to 50,000 people deployed in factories. So all these factories that we had, how would we deal with the creeping virus? And we all forget how problematic it was, and we didn't understand, how bad it would be, how fast it spread. But very quickly, with Rory's help in deciding how to manage closing down the factories, we found ourselves hearing the call from these people in New York City that were just tragically not able to get basic supplies. So the rest of the story that Peter will help us fill out today is we just commissioned a group of people to go make this happen, both in masks and ventilators, for breathing.
And were you, before I turn to Rory to ask him about how his members felt about this, I've got two other questions. Were you given clear instructions from the White House or the New York authorities or anyone else what you had to produce? Or was it up to you to decide, well, we think the biggest need is here? And in which case, how did you even do that?
Well, I was communicating with the White House about the unemployment issue with the factories. That as you hear me say, the sheer volume of people that were going to be out of work, I wanted to talk to them about it. So I was talking to Larry Kudlow, the advisor to the president. And in a casual way, I said, well, we might just make ventilators for you. And he said, if you could, that would be incredible. There was no direct order. There was no Department of Defense Act. And I hung up and got to a key leader inside Ford, Jim Bombeck, and we reached out to somebody at the Mayo Clinic, just that I know really well, and said, teach us about ventilators. And while he did that, he also described if you could help us with the basic masking, we could save a lot of lives. Boy, was that prescient, given what we now know about the virus spreading in masks. And so that in parallel, we started both of those efforts.
Right, because the numbers that you've actually made are quite remarkable. But before I turn to Rory, just one other question is this. Did you call up the other heads of the auto companies and say, let's do this together, let's try to parcel the work out? Or was it really a case of each company saying, right, we're going to try and do whatever we can?
You know, the instinct I had at the moment, frankly, was do what we can do, what we can control, you know, to try and simplify committees and meetings and just go get it done. And so I'm talking about we had to design and improve an existing ventilator in less than 3 weeks. We had to build and source the equipment to make these masks in less than 10 days. We had to recruit 1,000 people from Rory's union to come in, and the bravery of these folks is understated because there was no insight about the virus's behavior at that point, and they were coming in willing with safety measures that we agreed on, and they came to work. So really, that was the idea, is that human nature now being called to action and make something happen very fast.
Rory, I'd like to bring you in here because I'm curious, when you got the phone call saying you think you guys are metal bashers, auto workers, whatever else, we want you now to make masks or medical equipment, how did you react? What did your members think? And how many of them were actually volunteering to help? Because I'm sure a lot of them were saying, this is really dangerous for us.
Well, actually, you know, auto workers in this country have always heeded the call to serve the country. Jim talked about auto getting involved in defense production. My mother actually worked in a defense plant building 20 millimeter shells for airplanes. So there's a long history of auto workers, industry in this country stepping up when the call goes out to serve the nation. Our members gravitated to it very naturally. We actually had more people sign up wanting to go than we actually needed. And Jim is right. These members could have stayed home. They could have stayed home and safe. And you got to understand, at that time, there was a lot of unknown about what we were dealing with the virus. There was a lot of conflicting information, and a lot of our members were scared, and rightfully so. But they stepped up and said, we want to do our part to help the nation when they were in need. And I applaud the auto manufacturers for stepping up and offering their facilities along with our members to heed that call. It was a very honorable thing to do. And I'm sure history will show it was a very pivotal time in our country where industry came together with one common goal, and that's to defeat the virus.
Did the members get danger money or additional pay for going in?
No, they worked a lot of hours. And, you know, here again, I got to point out, they could have stayed at home and got paid just about, you know, what they were making with the CARES Act extra money. So they actually could have stayed home and almost not lost money, but they chose to come out of their comfort zone and go into a facility where we were setting up safety protocols to build PPE equipment. It was an honorable and very brave thing for them to do, and I love my membership anyway, but everyone in this country should have love and respect for auto workers for stepping up, and all workers, especially all essential workers in this country who kept us going during this time. And we're not out of it yet. We're probably going to be ramping up and building more PPE because, you know, we don't know what's looming down the road, but we're ready. And I'm glad that we've got the ability to step up and heed the call.
Well, I want to talk about the future in just a moment. But before I do, I'm curious, I hate to ask this, but did any of your members contract COVID-19? Did many die? I mean, what kind of sacrifice was this going onto the factory floor?
we lost members during the shutdown. But it's interesting, when we put our COVID task force together, we brought all three major companies together, and we all agreed on one thing. The UAW, Ford, GM, FCA, we agreed on one thing, that we had one common enemy, and we all had a united goal, and that's to keep our members safe in the workplace, and protect their standards of living at the same time. So we had a dual role to protect life and limb and protect standards of living. And I'm very proud that everyone put whatever differences they had aside and meet that common goal. Our safety protocols in the facility are pretty much, you won't see as stringent protocols if you went into an area hospital as you'll see when you come into one of our facilities. And our tracking so far has shown that our protocols are working. When you adhere to the protocols very strictly, it shows that we are able to mitigate the spread of the virus in our work facilities. But it's a daily task of monitoring, meeting, and planning to make sure that those protocols are in place. And we're constantly reminding everyone. And that's another point. We looked at this from a standpoint of protecting everyone who entered that facility, whether they be management, union, a UPS worker dropping off a package. It was our responsibility to make sure everyone who entered that facility was safe and protected. We worked toward that very high standard, and I'm very proud that we're having great success.
Jillian?
Right. Well, certainly fascinating. Jim, yeah.
I just want to build on the safety that was achieved. So these 1,000 people that we deployed into making this equipment, nobody contracted the virus. Of course, no one died from it. So the people that later contracted the virus, we were either before we shut down or after. But just as Rory's depicting, the ratio is so small that we're able to say today you're actually safer inside of a factory than you are outside right now, just because of the system we put in place. But I also, because I know you'll get to Peter Berg, the director, when I saw his movie, The Lone Survivor, and the way that he captured what human motivation is, in support of each other. I don't want to exaggerate this, but when you ask the question, were people paid to do this? You cannot imagine the emotion that was built around the heroic, we want to help those folks that we were seeing on the East Coast that were begging for somebody to bring supplies to them. I mean, you have to see that every night on the nightly news. So the passion for stepping up almost would be embarrassed by the idea of getting more money for it. That was not our motivation. I just want you to, I guess, feel the moment for how driven they were.
I can't even remember any of our members even asking. They never even question about the money. That's amazing. They just wanted to step up and help. And the money wasn't an issue. It was the challenge that was put before us by an unseen enemy that was a challenge that we all had to meet. And they played their role very well and very, very courageously. And as Jim pointed out, it was a challenge that they met, and they did it without looking for any personal enrichment or any advantage. It was something that they knew that they needed to do, and it's kind of hard to explain that. In this day and age we live in, it's kind of hard. And I appreciate Brother Berg here. A lot of the content of his movies talks about individuals who step up against grave odds and not for themselves, but for the enrichment of everyone.
Well, Rory, you've done it better than I could in terms of introducing Peter, because Peter, you have made movies in the past which are very much about human motivations for good and bad. The idea of you making a film about auto workers, might take a lot of people by surprise, because probably the last time anyone's pointed cameras inside an auto plant was probably Michael Moore, in a very different context. What prompted you to do this? Why did you suddenly say, I have to make a film about Ford?
Thank you for the question. It's a pleasure to be here. I've often been drawn to the workers of our country, whether that's the military and lone survivor, the oil rig workers that I documented in the film I did, Deepwater Horizon, about the oil rig that blew up off of Louisiana. On Patriots Day, I focused on first responders, police, FBI agents, and civilians that were caught up in the Boston Marathon bombing. These are stories of everyday heroism, of people who are rising to the very best of themselves, to the very best of the angels within themselves, which is something that my family used to talk about. It's something that I believe in. I had gotten to know Jim and Ford prior to COVID. We had been sort of talking about making a film about the future of Ford and Ford's innovative new movements and design teams and their determination to move with the times. And so Jim and I had a good relationship. When COVID hit, and I heard about this extraordinary ventilator and PPE program, I was reminded of my father teaching me at a very young age about what Ford and the UAW did during World War II with the building of the jets and the other military equipment. And I knew that this would be an extraordinary story. And I knew that particularly in this day and age that we are living in, where there's just so much really, really horrific divisiveness and people are at each other's throats constantly, to see what Jim and Rory and their teams were able to do and how they were able to put down the fighting and the arguing and the politics and just say, no, forget about that. We're not doing this for money. We're not doing this for Ford. We're not doing this for the UAW. We are doing this for our country. We are doing this for each other. It was very inspiring. It remains very inspiring. I look at these two men and I feel optimism and I feel hope for all of us as a country and as a people. So for me and my team, it was a no-brainer. It was an honor to be able to go in and meet these men and women of Ford and the UAW, who were certainly not doing this for the money, but doing it for what seems to have been truly honest, good old-fashioned human value. And that's a story that I am more than happy to tell.
Well, you were either very prescient or very lucky to be talking to Jim before this happened. I'm curious, did anything surprise you during the course of the filming?
I mean, I can't say that it surprised me, but like just how capable we are as a people when we decide that we want to do something, that our North Star is clear, that we're rowing together, the vast intelligence and work ethic and decency that was displayed in this Project Apollo between the Ford Motor Company and the highest level of executive and the UAW and the just hardest working American labor, all coming together and working. The ability to achieve such technological feats was just, I won't say surprising, because I believe in our country and I believe in men like Rory and Jim, but it was certainly a great thing to bear witness to.
I mean, it's fascinating. Nothing like having a common enemy to unite people. But I'm curious, when you look to the future now, and this is a question both for Jim and for Rory, do you think this is going to change the way that manufacturing is perceived in America? Because, there's been a lot of chatter about Rust Belt. All the cool kids want to go and work in Silicon Valley. They don't usually want to go and bash metal or go and work for auto companies. That's the perception. Do you think that this is going to in any way make industry seem more exciting or help a manufacturing renaissance more broadly?
Okay, the pandemic has shown just how essential to the American economy auto industry is. When we went down, the economy, soon as we went down, it looked like the economy almost skidded to a stop. And that is something that was a wake-up call for a lot of Americans. And you talk about workforce and labor in America, even brothers and sisters working in our grocery stores became essential. UPS drivers, everybody, so everybody can get medicine, the mail, our postal system. You really got a wake-up call and a joke about just how essential labor is in this country and keeping this moving forward. What we learned in our experience dealing with COVID-19 and the three companies was just how essential it is to work together peacefully and respectfully, understand on both sides of the table and realize that there are common themes and problems that we have to address collectively. And it kind of throws that old stereotype out the window about us fighting all the time. When we see that we can come together, face a unseen enemy like COVID-19 and be successful in protecting our brothers and sisters in the work facilities, it lends an example to what we can do as we face everyday problems. So it was a great lesson for me. Coming out of it, we were able to develop some great business relationships across the board that I'm very hopeful will last going into the future. Those things are great for both sides. So it was a wake-up call for a lot of people, and it was a lessons learned for us going forward that I'm sure will impact us in the future.
Yeah, well, I'm going to take you to that setting where Rory was meeting with two of my peers that run auto companies and himself. Again, this is you got to remember the condition of this fog hitting us that we don't know what it is. And Rory Gamble rose to the occasion. I mean, you just don't know how people are going to behave in a crisis. All of us in this broadcast are listening to us will know what I mean when something unexpected happens. I call it unexpected event management. Peter's chronicled this with oil rigs blowing up and war. But Rory took control of this and made the centricity of all of these auto companies around what we want to do for people, which in the message that I can give today is so refreshing, because no matter where you want to work, as somebody who's been in business a long time, you can do yourself a favor to work for people who care about you deeply. And that got us moving in the sense of the auto industry could have been devastated by COVID in the beginning because we shut down before it compounded. And there was a lot of economic damage to that. So Rory is kind of a hero to me. I told people this, that he impressed the hell out of me in the way that he grabbed control of this and the way he reasoned it. But then what I want to share with you is that the minute we started working on these problems, I mean, the supply chain is fragmented. That means all the components that make up things in the world spread all over the world. And these barriers that you had to leap over to get things to move were just, really, really difficult. In fact, that's your instinct is those are going to be redesigned because of this. And so Ford's really proud it makes more vehicles in America for America than anybody else. And we think that served us well. We've gained market share in this period. But I'm as proud of the way our team took on these objects that they had no experience building, and the engineering talent, what we would call manufacturing engineering. We partnered with extraordinary companies, 3M and General Electric, in a couple of these ideas. Both of those CEOs relayed to me that if Ford Motor Company hadn't been involved, they wouldn't have hit the kind of volumes they needed to hit. That's what our ability to do is to do this in scale. to make something really complex like a pickup truck be built in 63 seconds. And so the future really bodes well. And this is the tie bar to why Peter was talking to me before all this, is that the intelligence in these vehicles in the future are higher than what's in your computers or your cell phones or any kind of thing you're working on in Silicon Valley. So we're actually feeling a draft this way, that people want to work on these really complex products in the future. And now we have a great story, right? We have the kind of technical products, we have the kind of equilibrium for caring about people, and labor and management have a really great relationship in Detroit. It's really humming along, and I think it bodes well for the country.
I just wanted to add to that the example in this that we set. I started getting a lot of calls from other labor organizations. Just how did you guys do this? How did you come together and take this thing on? And I shared that with Jim and everybody. My phone's blowing up. Other labor organizations are looking at this and saying, how can we apply this? They love the example that we set. And that's a testament to the dedication and how we attacked fighting COVID-19 in our work facilities, and then adapting to build PPE. It's not easy to change an industrial facility over to make medical equipment. That is a daunting task in and of itself, because you're talking about going from an industrial environment to a very clean, sterile environment. To see that happen in real time was something I'll never forget. I'm so proud of our members, our tradesmen, everyone who was involved in doing that. That in and of itself should be a standard going forward for industry.
Pete, did you manage to film this as they were converting the factory lines? Amazing.
We did. We got in. It all happened extremely quickly, as Jim pointed out earlier. But we also had a group of filmmakers, of cameramen, of sound recorders, of editors, of production people, who also at that time were staring at the unknown. Nobody was clear on exactly how this disease was going to be spread. Production had been shut down. Also, I'm proud of our crew for going out to Detroit and putting on the protective equipment and filming, and we were given access. I would think 10 days, which I was actually a long time in the spectrum in terms of how quickly they set up. But we were able to get out there and capture the totality of the experience, from the early design meetings to the first ventilators coming off the line, and it was. As I said before, it was a truly beautiful thing to watch. And I appreciate what you said earlier. And I don't want to paraphrase you, but you said there's nothing like a common enemy to bring people together, and I do think that's true. But I think it's a mischaracterization to just put it in that context. And I do think it's important that COVID is an unseen enemy, and yes, people did come together, but I do think, and I hope the film speaks to this, that again, in these really messed up times of divisiveness, like certainly I've never seen in my lifetime, I think it is important to remember that we are actually decent human beings. And that, if there's something as penetrating and as piercing and undeniable as COVID, okay, we'll come together. But when you look at some of the other problems that we're all facing today, whether it's in the education departments, the medical departments, systemic racism, these are all, in theory, enemies. And what Jim and Rory have done is, again, a piercing reminder that we are able to work together, that fundamentally we all do want to look out for each other. Whether the enemy is as in your face as COVID, certainly was at that time, or some of these other issues. But I am, just very thankful that we were able to have that time to get in there and watch these men and women coming together to organize the ventilator and PPE program, and then that the UAW and the members of Ford opened themselves up to us so that we could really document this extraordinary event.
I'm going to tell you a quick story. Bill and I went over to the factory that you just asked about, where we set up these facilities, and we were meeting President Trump, to tour the ventilator production. But before he came, we met with the team that got called to put all the products together. Not the 1,000 who assembled it, but the team that designed it. And we were safe in this room, 6 feet apart. Everyone had a mask on. By the time I walked out, there were 7 of them, everyone was crying from, you could see their eyes. What were they tearful about? The joy they had in serving their country and the company and working with others. And I'm talking about, there were people that grew up in India. There were Black, there were white, there were men, there were women, all in these masks. And I turned to Bill and I said, this is such a magical moment. My day could end here and I never would feel such joy. That's what I want you to think the future has to be. And particularly if you want to compete in a global way, you have to have the advantage of the power of we. And so I'm really optimistic about that.
We're almost out of time, but I wanted to ask, so you've been producing a lot of ventilators, but you're now winding the ventilators down and focusing more on masks. Is that correct? And what exactly are you preparing for now? Are you expecting to see COVID-19 last for another year or two? Are you expecting the needs and requirements to change?
At the end of the story on the ventilators is that we just finished the 50,000th ventilator, which was our commitment to the Homeland Defense. And in parallel, what's happened in the science, most of the people that were dying of blood clots. It may be a vascular problem. So giving people blood thinners and some steroids has reduced the number of people that have had to go on ventilators, although we still need them. And there's parts of the world, Reverend Jesse Jackson called me and said, can you help us in Africa? There's parts of the world where they don't have the medicines and they need the ventilators. So we've stopped producing per the contract. We've shifted to the mass production because the goal here, as you know, is to dampen down the spread through masking, get kids back to school, try and get the economy not disrupted. So we've committed to make 100 million masks beyond what we've already produced. The surgical masks, I have one right here, has a little Ford logo right on the top there. And we're going to make 100 million of these. And we've started by giving them to the most vulnerable parts that are suffering the worst, nursing homes, places in cities where there's not enough space for people to be away from each other. And then finally, I just want to confirm to you that I'm really optimistic with the therapeutics and the vaccine work that people like Bill Gates and others are saying this is over next year sometime. And I think we're proving we can cope with it fairly well, but it needs to get handled because it's so hard on everyone psychologically.
Rory.
Yeah, we're planning to ride this thing out until there's a workable vaccine in play that starts killing the spread of the virus and getting us back to normal. You got to understand, our people wear PPE equipment all day at work. They work 8, 9, 10 hours with masks on, face shields. They work behind partitions. The whole work life has changed. When you work in a facility and you're tied to a line building automobiles, there's a social component inside the plant that kind of gets you through the day. And that's the interaction with your brothers and sisters that work with you and the camaraderie you build up with working with the same people every day. You're having great conversations. You're talking about family and friends. Well, and with our safety protocols, a lot of that has pretty much stopped. So You got on a lot of personal protection equipment. You can't socialize in the workplace. It's a pretty daunting task for auto workers to work in this environment. But they know they have to do it. They know the importance of their role as it relates to keeping the economy going in the country, taking care of their families and doing their fair share. And at the same time, they step up and do things like building masks and ventilators. So it's a pretty significant achievement as it relates to our industry. And it will surely be remembered well into history. And I know there'll be books written about this effort. And I think it's just very courageous and honorable on our part to serve.
I just would say quickly, I agree with what Rory just said, and I think that, to your question about will this translate into any kind of meaningful change in Washington or anywhere else, I don't know, but I do feel the same way when I was taught to look at what Detroit did for this country in World War II. That's something that has stayed with me my entire life and been sort of a beacon that's reminded me of who we are capable of being. And I think similarly, when people look back on what Detroit did in 2020 with ventilators and PPE, it's going to be a reminder that we are capable of doing some pretty terrific things. And I think that is a positive that will stick around with us for a long time. And I would be happy to make a movie about this.
Well, thank you, Peter. It's been a fascinating talking to all of you. Thank you for providing a shot of upbeat inspiration and good news in these very troubled times. Thank you for the improvisation you've had to go through just to be on this broadcast, this panel debate. We realized earlier we all have dogs with us, sitting with us, and so we've all been struggling to keep them quiet as well, which may or may not be a good thing. But thank you also for the way that you have so cleverly illustrated a change in the zeitgeist. Sometimes it's the biggest unexpected shocks that actually set us on a new course we never thought we were going to go on, be that in life or a company or in society. And history doesn't go in straight lines. It does actually go in pendulum swings. And the fact that you've mentioned so many times what happened in World War II is an interesting sign that the zeitgeist is indeed changing in America. And let us all hope it's going to be changing for the better. So for anyone who's watching, stay safe. I hope you found this interesting. And in the meantime, don't rush away. Stay watching because you'll see a sneak preview of the documentary On the Line, telling the story about what's happened at Ford.
Project Apollo was formed after listening to a medical professional identify an incredible need for personal protection equipment.
It's incredible that a company of that size was willing to pivot and flex the supply chain.
Our plants were down. What's also unique is we have all this equipment in an automotive vehicle. So this really is about that type of scrappiness. We got to use what we got.
There is no greater pressure because you're building a piece of equipment that's going to save somebody's life.
We didn't have a lot of time to make this stuff. And the amazing part was people from the UAW who raised their hand and volunteered.
Nobody said no. Nobody said why. Everybody just said, let's go.
I didn't have to volunteer, but I felt that it was for the greater good.
If I could do something positive, I wanted to do that. If everybody said, well, I'm not going to do it, none of this will get built.
Vehicle programs take years to develop. This got put in and running in 3 weeks. I've never seen anything like it.
To get an email from a nurse or a doctor, it gave you goosebumps to know that that person got something that you produced.
I never served the military, and this was an opportunity for me to say, hey, I can do something for the country and for Americans.
The UAW members stepped up. I'm just so grateful to be a part of this. This is history right here.